The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
As Jesus was setting out on a journey, a man ran up and knelt before him and asked, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. You know the commandments. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not defraud. Honor your father and mother." He said to him, "Teacher, I have kept all these since my youth." Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said, "You lack one thing. Go sell what you own and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." When he heard this, he was shocked and went away grieving, for he had many possessions. Then Jesus looked around and said to his disciples, "How hard it will be for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of God." And the disciples were perplexed at these words. But Jesus said to them again, "Children, how hard it is to enter the kingdom of God. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God." They were greatly astounded and said to one another, "Then who can be saved?" Jesus looked at them and said, "For mortals it is impossible, but not for God. For God all things are possible." Peter began to say to him, "Look, we have left everything and followed you." Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, there is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for my sake and for the sake of the good news, who will not receive 100-fold now in this age, houses, brothers and sisters, mothers and children, and fields, with persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last will be first." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
William Willimon, a retired United Methodist bishop, was long the dean of the chapel at Duke University's Divinity School. In a journal for preachers, he talked about the difficulty in an affluent congregation to preach today's gospel as good news, as we are called to preach. Because it's about money, about how having many possessions makes it difficult to follow Jesus, especially in a world that so highly values wealth, position, and success. Today's readings and its parallels in Matthew's and Luke's Gospels appear to be the only stories in the Gospels where Jesus invites someone to follow him who chooses to walk away because the cost is too great. This is, of course, the rich young man with many possessions who came to Jesus with an urgent question: "What can I do to assure eternal life, to guarantee that I will be part of God's realm?" He seemed to be sincere. He was not just asking his question to challenge Jesus or to try to trip him up as so many others had done. Maybe he was a bit self-satisfied, a bit proud of his wealth and accomplishments. Maybe he even believed that his wealth was a sign of God's favor. Or maybe he was looking for a pat on the back, having been faithful in following the law all of his young life. But one thing was sure: with all his wealth, he was still seeking something more. This was an ultimate question, something that wealth did not satisfy, and that is why he came to Jesus. In fact, he ran to Jesus. He took a knee in front of him, a posture not only respectful, but humble and reverent. maybe even repentant. The young man was probably hoping for just a small thing that would fill the void he was feeling. One more thing to mark off of his checklist. Instead, Jesus gave him a difficult and impossible task. Sell everything you own, give it to the poor, and follow me. Not another thing to do, but a way to be. We try so hard to explain this story away, and it doesn't matter how we understand the Bible. This is one of the clearest calls, one of the clearest statements of the gospel call of what it means to follow Jesus. For those who call themselves biblical literalists, it is about money and wealth. Jesus says to give it all away to the poor, not some of it, not a tithe of 10%, but all of it. For those of us whose understanding of the Bible is not literal, but looks at Jesus' stories as having more complex meanings that take into account the times in which they took place, still the shock value does not go away. Maybe Jesus is not asking each one of us to throw ourselves and our families onto the welfare rolls, but we are being called to examine our lives, to see what attachments become obstacles between us and God. It may indeed be wealth, money, or possessions. It may be the drive for success or prestige or power. It may be our attitudes, our values, or our identity. How many times do we hear people say, and to be honest, I have heard myself say, I just looking beyond our immediate surroundings and those of our own families and communities. It's easy to just follow the checklist, the letter of the law. But in doing so, we miss the real point. When we do that, when we stay too close to the rules, we limit our vision to only our particular way of understanding. And in doing so, we risk hurting and excluding others. When we hold too tightly to our own values, our own identity, we take care of ourselves first. When we get too wrapped up in the endless loop of acquiring more stuff, more power, more success, we become careless about our world and its people. Continued success and growth come to mean ignoring the negative effects that growth might have on our environment or on people in other parts of the world. This has a name. It's called functional atheism. Parker Palmer defines it this way: the belief that ultimate responsibility for everything rests with us. This is the unexamined unconscious conviction that if anything decent is going to happen here, we are the ones who must make it happen. A conviction held even by people who talk a good game about God. In this Bible story, we see that things haven't changed so much in 2,000 years. We want it both ways, as did the rich young man who asked for something more he could do. We want what makes us comfortable, the things that are of the world and valued in our society, and we want to feel close to God and be assured of a place in God's realm. When we find out that it doesn't work that way, we too walk away in sadness, even if deep down we know that all of our stuff doesn't really satisfy, doesn't guarantee happiness or even safety. Lest you think that this affects only individuals, it does not. It affects our churches too. Our local churches, our denominations, our theological groupings like progressives, evangelicals, fundamentalists, seekers, nuns and duns, and so on.
At the local church level, we may cling more tightly to our local stories and traditions than to the foundational stories and traditions of our faith. We may indulge in nostalgia for a past that cannot come again. For circumstances change, and we must change with them in order that the gospel can speak in this time and place. For our stories and our history are important, but not as ends in themselves. They are of value for how they have made the church and its people what and who they are, but also as the ingredients for an ever-evolving identity and a direction that moves into new times and challenges while remaining faithful to the God who brought the church together in the first place. The God who urges us to put God first. I believe that ultimate questions like that of the rich young man are still in people's minds and hearts. Yet fewer are coming to the church to seek the answers. This is really a matter of stewardship. How is that? Jesus said to give everything to the poor, not to the church. Well, the possessions are not the only point. The larger point is reorienting our lives to follow Jesus, letting go of all that stands in the way. And whether it is our money, our time, our talents, they need to be rooted in faith and then pointed outward and used with intention. How might we re-examine how we live as individuals and as a community of faith? How can we engage in deep reflection about how we live as people of God? Can we move out of our comfort zones, going beyond ourselves, and sometimes letting go of what we want for the sake of others? Today's gospel reading begins with the words, "As he was setting out on a journey." Another popular translation says it this way, "As Jesus started on his way." In the early days after Jesus' resurrection, a word for following Jesus was the way. Today, in 2018, our presiding Bishop Michael Curry has outlined a way for Episcopalians called the Way of Love. It is a series of 7 practices to help our congregations enter into deeper study and practice. This is a perfect time for Grace Church to join in. We stand at the literal threshold of the move to our new parish house, the fulfillment of a long-term dream. Though we will undoubtedly need some time to catch our breath after all of the effort, we can then move forward into new possibilities in our life together and for the community and the world. And we may be surprised. We may find ourselves not so much deprived, but liberated, as free to discover new ways of being God's people, ways that bring joys we have not imagined. I often wonder what happened to the rich young man. I hope he came back. After he went away from Jesus grieving to carry on with his life, I hope that he continued to feel that something was missing, that he needed to return to God. I hope that he remembered how Jesus looked at him with love, even as he walked away, even as he decided that he couldn't do what Jesus asked of him. Jesus used the image of a camel trying to pass through the eye of a needle. A ridiculous image, impossible. It was hyperbole, of course, but that's exactly what Jesus wanted, to show us how very impossible it is for us to love both those worldly things and to follow him. Ah, yes, there is good news here after all. Jesus looks at each of us and all of us as a congregation with love. Even when we hesitate, when we can't quite let go. As impossible as it is to do as Jesus asks, it's always possible with God. And that, my friends, is very good news indeed. Amen.